Being out in the desert, it's not uncommon to see strange things. Lights in the sky, weird sounds, even beings. And I have an account that is absolutely terrifying to the core. In fact, I'm sure you may not even believe me, but all my friends who were at this bonfire can testify that what we experienced was something of the evil supernatural realm. So let's clear out some details first. We're all about 18-19, and since the pandemic, we've been driven crazy. So on this night, we were looking to go out into the desert and just have some fun, away from being locked in, and our parents, of course. It was a group of about 7 of us. Me, my girlfriend, a buddy of mine, his girlfriend, a couple mutual friends, and one of their family members. And so we drive out to this small area that's not too far from home, build a pretty good bonfire, and, of course, like any 18-year-olds do, bring some booze and some snacks, and get ready to have just a fun night of just letting loose, because we were all getting pretty tired of being stuck inside, for one. This was actually, too, about a year ago, maybe last June, or maybe last May. It was still right when the pandemic was in the thick of everything. So we got the bonfire going, we're having a good time, cutting up, laughing, and talking. I think none of us had dinner yet, so we were eating some snacks and just talking. We did have beer set aside, but nobody at this point had even drunk yet. And, for whatever reason unknown, my friend's family member, we'll call him Craig, starts talking about Skinwalkers, which really creeped all the rest of us out. Because the conversation was, I think, about some funny memories or something, and he just starts talking and going on about Skinwalkers, something some of us had never even heard about. And then my buddy is like, you shouldn't talk about them, you're going to draw the energy of them here. And even more so being nighttime, all alone in the desert night. They start bickering and arguing back and forth, and then my girlfriend and his girlfriend start to get really creeped out, while the rest of us are trying to tone it down. I mean, the argument or discussion got pretty heated. It ended up with them calling each other a few names and voices rising for sure. But maybe after 5 or so minutes, we're able to calm both of them down and successfully change the topic of conversation. But it doesn't seem like that lasted long, because Craig just shut up altogether and just sat there. Just as I start to feel the good vibes coming back, of everybody smiling and laughing again, we all 7 of us, hear this sound of what appears to be large, multiple animals coming towards us, but staying and circling around the fire, like they were just outside the light of the fire, by, I don't know, a couple car lengths, however many feet that is. And this was maybe 20-some odd minutes after the initial conversation of Skinwalkers was started. And we all hear it, and so we all turn around, looking for the source of this noise, and whatever animal or animals are making them. It kind of reminded me personally of a couple of loose cows, except extremely aggressive with the way their footsteps were, but they did not sound bipedal. It was definitely 4 legs, and there was at least 5 or 6 of them, just kept circling us around the fire. We try not to think much of it, like maybe it was just some loose cattle, or maybe horses. There's got to be a reason for it, right? But as time went on, and by time I mean 5-10 minutes, we're trying our best to ignore this, but the noises, all the strange sounds are just getting more and more apparent. Like the hoof sounds, or so it sounded like, the snorting, the hissing, even growling. And not long after, we are all freaking out. So, one of our buddies decided he was going to walk the quarter-mile or so back to the car to grab an adequate flashlight and expose these, what he thought were loose steer for what they were. So he starts jogging back the direction of the cars, and not even 2 minutes later, comes sprinting back towards the fire, and we see him running from a distance, and so we're calling out to him, asking, "What's wrong? What happened?" And he runs right up to the fire, and he is pale as a ghost. I had never seen Devin this way. I'll call him Devin for the sake of the story. He was as pale as a sheet, and he looks at us all in the eyes, and his eyes are about as big as a plate, and he keeps saying that he was chased, and we're like, "What? What do you mean chased?" He said that he got a good look at those things, because one or two of them broke off from the other few and followed him as he walked towards the car in the night. He said that he kind of saw what it was. He described it as being half man, half reptile, but that it was skeletal looking. And he was all choked up and scared and shaking as he's telling us this. Now, the entire night, multiple of these things continued to circle around us. Maybe, I don't know, if I had to guess, 30 feet beyond the light of the fire. But they would never get closer than that. Even as the fire died down, we had already planned on being out here most of the night anyway, until the early wee morning hours, so we had plenty of wood. That wasn't the problem. We were just terrified to leave the light of the fire, and the entire night was incredibly fearful, unexpected, and unsure of what was going to happen to us. I think at some point we all decided that we're just going to have to stay within the light of the bonfire until light. We don't have a choice. And I've never in my life felt like I was living in a real Hollywood horror movie. Until this night. And at some point, a huge argument, which turned into a fist fight with Craig and a couple of my buddies, ensued. Because the buddy, not the one that saw this thing and walked to the car, but the other one, flipped out on Craig saying, "You caused this, you brought these things here to us because you mentioned Skinwalkers." And the fist fight ensued. They're fighting, rolling back and forth. We had to break that up, and it seemed like whatever these things were really drawn to the violence. Like it excited them, I guess if you want to call it that. It was very strange. But we were basically forced to stay up all night and keep the fire going until there was just enough light, and as the dawn came, and just enough light peeked over the horizon to expose somewhat beyond the light of the fire, we didn't see anything. So maybe whatever it was knew that the sun was coming up and retreated. Either that or they were very well camouflaged. So we put out the bonfire as soon as we had enough light to run back to the car, and we all bolted. And it's not like we were anywhere special. We'd all just pulled randomly off the side of a road at a spot we all thought would work. And if you had the car, you could look out and see clearly right where a bonfire was. Like I said, you're out here in the desert. It's flat. There ain't nothing to hide behind. And that was the last time we've done a bonfire. I still talk to my friends, but we've not done anything like that since, at least at night. And as a matter of fact, I just tried mentioning this probably about a week ago because the story popped up in my head and I felt like talking to one of my buddies and wanted assurance that that actually happened. He flat out refused to acknowledge that it even happened. I've not spent any time questioning any of my other friends who were there, asking them, "What do you think? Did you see the same thing?" But I feel like if we had to stand witness for it, we all could, which is why I stand by what I originally did in my opening paragraph. There was more than just me. We all experienced this hell as a group. No matter how terrifying it may have been. Oh, and one last thing I need to include. If you do decide to read this story, which I'm not sure if you will, please leave my real name out of this. Thank you. I'm only 1/4 native, Chickasaw to be specific. My grandfather, who the majority of this story is going to be about, married a white Slovakian woman, and he, of course, was full-blooded Chickasaw. He's got all sorts of terrifying tales of a creature that he saw, that he described going from being a man to shapeshifting into this reptile-like thing, or as he called it specifically, the man-dragon, because of how terrifyingly fierce that it looked. It was also extremely violent to not towards just him, but the tribe itself, and any man that it came across. It was full of bloodlust. He says that the entity, although disguised itself as a man, distinctly still looked different and tried to blend in with the tribe, but everybody knew what it was, and it was always opted out. On several occasions, it had tried to kill several of his grandfather's siblings and other fellow tribe members back in the day, and at one point, they just stopped seeing it altogether, and that was the end of that. It really makes you wonder exactly what it is they experienced and saw. It got to such an extreme, though, that the tribe, at one point or another, had sent about 3 of their top warriors to go after this thing. They returned unsuccessful and were not able to locate it, but that at nighttime, this creature would slowly find its way within the village and often try and attack several of the tribe's members, if not steal the children and attack the women. Really anybody it could. The tribes knew this thing as some sort of reptilian shapeshifter creature, or the shapeshifter dragon, they often referred to it as, in the Chickasaw native tongue. Because I'm only like 1/4 native, I don't know enough about my own culture to really understand the language that much, since it was never spoken to me. Although my grandfather has taught me some of the language, very small amounts though. My parents, and even he, mostly talks to me in English. I'm just glad I never had to see this thing myself. And I guess other tribes in the entire Oklahoma area and northern Texas also have written and verbal stories passed down of the Dragon Man and how it has the ability to take shape and form of people and can shapeshift at will. Knowing the very limited amount of knowledge I do about my own culture and my own people, is it possible that this is some sort of skinwalker, or maybe something else entirely? I don't know. I mean, my people do have a lot of stories about Bigfoot too, and Dogman, puckwudgies, and several other cryptid-like creatures, even flying ones, and ones that live in the water. My people even had lakes that were marked as not safe because of certain beings that lived in them and dwelt at the bottom of the lake. Is it possible that this Dragon Man surrounded itself in the woods nearby and was just waiting until the right time to strike? Which it probably never got, because my people pursued it endlessly until it just stopped coming around. These are questions I'll probably never have the answer to, and my father doesn't have many answers to them either, or my grandfather, but it's something I look to explore more of, and hopefully come back to you with a lot more terrifying stories. I had my own creepy, eerie encounter back in 2004 when I was still in high school and used to have Saturday night Halo parties with a small circle of friends. It was pretty much the same thing every Saturday night. We would show up, Mom would order us a pizza, and we would just play Halo till the wee morning hours. Usually be pretty exhausted, but filled with enough soda, pizza, and adrenaline to sometimes carry us up to 4 or 5 in the morning. I remember that well, because we would usually get so excited, end up yelling and keeping his mom up all night when, after inviting 5 15-year-old boys over for a video game night and having to get up for work early the next day, it was probably sleep suicide for her. But there's always one night that stands out to me, as was easily the creepiest, and I'm pretty sure if I talked to all my friends who were a part of that circle, they'd all remember the exact same thing. I can't remember the exact time in the morning, but I can tell you it was after 1 a.m., because on this night, his mom stayed up pretty late with us, just hanging out, talking, making food. She was actually one of the most coolest moms you could ever meet. She wouldn't play video games with us, but you could tell she tried to be into it with us, and try to sit and have conversation. It was really nice, and after a couple of glasses of wine, she made the decision to turn in for bed, since she'd have to be getting up early, like 5 or 5:30 in the morning, something like that. So we said our goodnights, and we continued staying up playing. My friend, I think, was getting up to grab a slice of pizza when we heard a sound outside the sliding glass door. Before I continue with my harrowing story, let me explain the layout of his house. So you first walk in, and you're greeted by an enormously oversized living room with his large TV right in the corner. So as soon as you step in and turn to your right, the TV is tucked in the corner, facing you at a diagonal angle. But if you were to turn your head directly straight, it would go right into the kitchen with a large island. Now keep walking straight. To your left would be the hallway where the bedrooms were. Keep walking straight, and now you're right at about the fridge. Now if you were to turn right, you would run directly into the island. So going around it are the sliding glass doors. His entire kitchen, dining room, and living room were just like one big open room. I think it was a custom house they had built, but that's irrelevant. The sound we heard outside was almost like an animal, but I actually thought it was somebody trying to open the sliding glass door. Thinking to myself, okay, maybe somebody's trying to play with us or play a prank on us, but also mildly worried in the back of my head because I realized none of us had stepped outside for any reason. But after maybe 20 seconds of this, the sound had stopped. We all had heard it. I thought it was weird, but just assumed it was probably a raccoon or something. So we went back to playing our skirmish death match. Maybe another 45 minutes rolls around, and now we all began to have this strange feeling. We all discussed it openly. We felt like there was something outside the house. I don't even know how to describe it to you. We never used the term paranormal, ghosts, or demonic entities, of course. But whatever it was, the electromagnetic energy around the house and in the house changed. It felt like you were standing next to one of those rubber balls. You know how, like when you're a kid, somebody would take a balloon and rub it really fast against your hair, and then make your hair all staticky and stand up. And you could kind of feel the electricity in the air. That's kind of how it was, except all over the house. And we all noticed it, several of us making comments. We almost wondered if it was a thunderstorm that was about to happen. Then, on the outer wall, right where the TV is outside, we hear this incredibly loud thud, like something very large jumping 10 feet off the air onto the dirt. We didn't hear anything after that. So, we all got up, kind of wondering what on earth was that. We go to the window, which is closer to the opposite corner of where the TV is, and try to look out. There's no porch light, or really any light for a matter of fact on that side of the house. It was just pitch black. We didn't see anything. So things were getting weird, but nobody chalked it up to anything just yet. Now we go back to playing Halo, and now it's maybe closer to 2:30 in the morning, finishing off the pizzas that we had bought. I'll never forget this moment. We were playing a game called King of the Hill in Halo, where you have to try and control a small area of territory. I remember, I was just about to cap the time when we heard my friend's mom scream bloody murder. We all stop, look back. We hear her scream a second time and come running out of the room in a complete panic. We're asking her what's going on, assuming maybe a mouse had found its way in her bed, or maybe a snake. We had no idea, but we were all a little on edge with everything going on. And she's beginning to cry, saying there was this really creepy lizard face watching her from the window. We all assumed it was just somebody in a costume trying to play a prank. Now, the majority of us were very worried, but my friend, the one whose mom it was, decided to call the police right then and there, and we're going to catch this person who's trying to prank our house. While my friend is on the phone with the police, and they're about to send somebody over, his mom is still in hysterics because, for whatever reason, this grown woman was terrified at seeing a supposed man in a lizard costume staring at her through the window. But I guess I can't blame her. She was probably terrified that this person was planning on breaking in and doing God only knows what to her. So, now we're all freaked out, on edge. Halo has kind of taken a back seat, on pause, and the only weapon we have besides knives in the kitchen is a steel baseball bat. Now we're all kind of scared to go outside, but we determine if we go out in an entire group, whoever this punk is can't do anything. So, we each grab a knife, and my friend, after getting off the phone with the cops, grabs his steel bat. We turn on the porch light, and we all step outside in a very close-knit formation. We're looking around, and we realize in that moment, we can't hear a thing. This was in May, so the night is usually alive with crickets and sounds. It was so quiet. It wasn't just quiet, but it was like an eerie quiet, like anything was about to happen. So here we are, all on edge, standing out on his front porch, weapons in hand, expecting some psycho in a lizard costume to come attacking us. We also had a flashlight. At least one of us did. The rest of us were poorly equipped with our phone's flashlight apps, which, in the dead of night, aren't really that bright. As we're all huddled together, looking around, expecting to see this psycho walking towards us, we see headlights coming our direction, and I bet we looked like fools, because it was the officer. He pulled up, very freaked out by seeing how freaked out we all were, about to draw his weapon, asking us if everything was okay, and we quickly explained that we were on edge and told him the situation. We were obviously able to calm down enough to not provoke any sudden action from an officer, like him shooting at us because we had weapons on us. So we calmly explained what was going on, and right then and there, as he's taking our statement, we all, the officer included, my friend's mom, and all 5 of us, hear this loud banging sound on the back side of the house. Right now, it's probably close to 3 a.m. We're all standing in the front driveway, speaking to this officer. We hear this noise, and immediately, all of our attention is brought back to that side. The officer, looking concerned, tells us all to quickly go inside, and he holds onto his gun and works his way towards the back of the house. We all run inside, lock the doors. Now we're freaked out, because whoever this intruder was trying to break in. It sounded like somebody throwing something heavy at the house. We actually hear the gunshot go off. Bam! Bam! My friend's mom starts screaming, and my friend tries to calm her down. But now we're all like, dude, what on earth? What if he had a weapon? What if he was trying to get in and kill us? After we heard the 2 gunshots, it went quiet. Probably about 7 or 8 minutes later, the officer knocks on our door, and he's pale white, tells us that whoever it was is now gone. We begin storming him with questions, like who was that? What happened? Why did you have to fire your pistol? And he calmly explained, as nerve-wracking as possible, that this person in a large reptile suit came charging after him, and he had to fire 2 shots. They apparently acted extremely hostile, and were faster than any person he's ever seen. Once he fired both shots, this person disappeared. So he did a full sweep of the perimeter, several times, didn't see anything, and for whatever reason, you could tell by the expression on his face, he was covered in cold sweat and was pale. Like there's more to the story that he wasn't telling us. That this wasn't just a person in a reptile suit. He seemed very short of breath, drained of color, and kept muttering to himself. He finally said that he's going to stay around, stick in the area, just in case this person decides to come back. Now none of us know what's truly going on, and we're all terrified to know that somebody might come and break in and potentially harm us, and they somehow survived 2 gunshots from an officer. The rest of the night went quiet, but we were all pretty much huddled together on the couch, just waiting for sunrise. I'd like to tell you I at least got an hour of sleep, but I really doubt it was even that. From that point forward, to probably 7 or 8 a.m, it was kind of just a blur of adrenaline and fear, hoping this person does not come back. So this is where the story really changes. We go out there at 8 a.m, because the officer comes back to talk to us, and one of our friends goes and scouts around, now that it's daylight, around the house. We all find large tracks walking all around the house, because the dirt at the side of the house, where this person had been, was very soft, and they left tracks. Instead of finding human prints, we found large prints indented pretty deep into the soft ground. The only problem is, they were like 3 or 4 toed, and very alien looking. It literally looked like a giant reptile was walking around. Seeing that scared all of us, and I can tell, it even made the officer a bit unnerved. But he did a pretty good job of keeping his professional composure. That's pretty much my story. The only thing different that I would really add is that, as time would go on, throughout the rest of high school, the mom would talk about going outside at night to smoke cigarettes or to take out the trash, and feeling very bad feelings at night, like she was being watched, or that somebody was out to get her. She never felt quite right after that experience. I think they ended up moving out of that house, but I can't remember. It's been so long. 16, 17 years now. The major things that crept me out were two things of my story. The first, the officer kept acting like he knew something and just wouldn't talk about it. And he seemed so sketched out over something that he saw or dealt with. I mean, he shot 2 shots off. That's saying something. The second is the tracks we found the following morning on a bright, clear, sunny day. There's no way a person in a suit made those tracks. So that can only really mean one thing. There's some sort of upright walking dinosaur that tried to break into the house, apparently. Whatever it was, or whoever it was, tried to attack the officer and failed. I would also like to conclude that it was probably more than a person, because why would a trained officer be so shaken up at what they had saw and shot at? That's just not very likely. And somebody who gets shot by a Glock doesn't just disappear. You go down, you get arrested, more police show up. The older I get, the more I'm convinced we dealt with something that certainly was not human. My dad and I were coming back from a family reunion in Tennessee, and we decided to go to some places that had made him the happiest as a child. Seeing as how our family had moved from that area before, he was far old enough to really remember them. We arrived at one specific location, and we noticed a famous stream that he would always talk about as a kid that he loved to go and fish at, play, and just be a kid, had been replaced by a small highway. So we drove around a little while longer, searching for other areas. We found another good one, a little place that he liked to hang out as a teenager. This area was now full of discarded cans and garbage. It wasn't all that great. As we're kind of looking around this area, further back, there were trails that he would usually hike down, and being a teenager, was full of debauchery. He's motioning for me to continue down this trail that led just a little bit deeper into the woods. Now, keep in mind, at this point, a lot of the surrounding wilderness had been turned to highway, and much of the surrounding swamps were now being used for development, not like they were back in the 80s. Now, the surrounding woods we were entering were very thick, very dense. It even kind of cut off light the further in you went. And, I don't know exactly what it was at first. I guess I kind of just got a bad feeling in the pit of my stomach. Not anything specific, like what you tell in your stories where people get the feeling that they were being watched. Nothing like that. It was more just a gut instinct, like it's probably not safe to continue on further. In that moment, I assumed it was maybe because there might be dangerous homeless people around, or drug addicts, or what have you, since there did seem to be signs of homeless camps, what with all the garbage and cans and stuff, or worse. Now, out of the blue, my father stops dead in his tracks, sticks out his arm as if to stop me from walking further, and I look up at him, and he's staring right at something, and he has the most serious expression on his face. So I'm asking him, "Dad, what do you see? What's up?" And I look out to where he's looking. Well, directly in front of us was kind of this little marsh, I guess you can call it. There was a cement wall on the other side that led to a lone road. Well, on this concrete block, or concrete wall, I guess you can call it, was a medium-sized storm drain. And out of the storm drain was climbing this, what I'll describe to you as a lizard man. I feel silly for even typing that, but that's the only way how I know how to describe it. I mean, Imagine a person in a lizard costume or something. Except the movements were so smooth that there's no way this would be somebody in a costume. All the way out here, it didn't really make any sense. We weren't exactly miles and miles out from town, but we also weren't in the middle of a metropolitan area either. And who in their right mind would be climbing out of a storm drain in that sort of costume? We saw it kind of climb its way out and climb down into the marsh. Luckily, we were kind of tucked away back in the trees enough where this creature or animal did not seem to notice us, but my father and I got a very good look at it. Honestly, it kind of reminded me of like a half-man, half-dinosaur sort of thing. The head was very much so reptilian-like. The body was covered in scales, and it had a man very much like a body. 2 arms, a chest, body, legs, all that stuff. Which is why I made the lizard man costume reference a paragraph ago. Once it climbed down out of the storm drain, it began walking off in the opposite direction, into the thick tree line where there's more dense, thicker swamps. It never turned to look in our direction, and never seemed to have noticed us. My dad, of course, his gaze was locked on this thing for the whole 20-30 seconds that we watched it disappear. I think him and I were in such shock and awe, but more so him. I kind of couldn't believe my eyes, but he seemed to have this look on his face that just screamed danger. After this thing disappeared into the thicket of the trees, he finally broke his gaze and looked at me and just said, "We should leave, now." You know, I wasn't going to challenge that. I didn't ask any questions, so we quickly headed on back up the trail, maybe no more than a half a mile, up to the original spot that had all those discarded cans and garbage, made our way back further, and got to the car. After some time, I was the one to finally break the silence and ask, "Dad, what did we see out there? I mean, we both saw it, right? Is that some sort of unidentified animal or maybe undiscovered species?" He remained quiet and just looked at me with a very cold stare and said, "I don't know, son, but I didn't like it." I mean, I know it's a very anticlimactic ending to my encounter, but that's really all it was said. And my father and I have not talked about it since. I mean, I don't really see much of a reason to, but I thought in recent events with the world, I would maybe try and find some time, now that I had off, to reach out to different paranormal investigators and even story narrators, which is why I'm kind of drawn to your work and your channel. So I thought I would shoot you an email. And hey, worst comes to worst, I don't get a response. And best comes to best, you read my story and your audience can help me out, since it appears they've helped out so many others. Best of luck and thank you so much. It was at nighttime, and I was driving along Highway 24, right around the area of this old mill house. This is when I stopped at a stop sign, and I see something large coming out of the tall field grass. At first, I assumed it was maybe a deer, but then I saw it was clearly no deer. The creature I saw, well, I can't identify it. I can tell you this, though. It was a behemoth of a thing. Maybe 800 pounds, and I'm not exaggerating. And its body was large and very serpentine-like, or snake-like, I should say. The head alone was maybe 2 or 3 feet large. Yeah, I'm not kidding you. This thing was massive. And it just seemed to kind of rise up out of the grass so calmly. It got about 10 feet away from my car and just glanced on by, as if me being there wasn't a big deal at all. In fact, it really didn't pay any attention to me. Like, it could have cared less that I even saw this thing. And as you can imagine, seeing something like this for the first time, especially at night, feeling extremely vulnerable, having no weapons, nothing, I was terrified out of my mind. This giant human reptile thing walking around with 2 red eyes. Part of me wanted to just stick in my disbelief. This creature checked off every box in a horror movie cliche. But at the same time, I couldn't deny what I was seeing. Its gait, its movement. You could see its muscles and skin. I mean, either this was somebody in the most convincing Hollywood monster costume I have ever seen and that's ever been made, or this was something truly out of this world. What's your opinion? This story takes place back in 2014. I was in a 2-story house with my brother, kind of out in the backwoods of Missouri. He and his band rented this house out collectively for rehearsal. It wasn't an out of town too far, but you had to drive maybe about 10-15 minutes to get to it. And being a good brother that he is, allowed me to stay in the upper 2-story part, which is just one big open room, which I used for my bedroom for a couple of weeks after getting out of a very toxic relationship. So, very early on in the morning, I'd say 3 or 4, I was having trouble sleeping, and I'm out there on the balcony looking down just at the woods and the surrounding area, lost in thought. And I suddenly see a huge, maybe 6-7 foot tall dark figure darting across the tree line. It caught my attention, and I thought it was an animal at first, until I looked. That's when I could see the figure much more clearly, because it moved. What I was looking at was a large bipedal animal, and believe it or not, it kind of resembled a cross between a gorilla, a lizard, and a human. Although I couldn't see every enunciation of detail. It was very dark in color. Not just its coloring, but the lighting as well. Its head was huge. It had big long arms, and its body was also large too. The head, though, was more elongated, and, like I stated, easily 6 to 7 feet tall. The only reason that I even saw this thing was because it was a full moon that night. But where the moon was positioned and angled in the sky did not, unfortunately, light up this thing so I can get a look at it. It was in fact on the other area of the sky, giving just enough light that I could see something was here, but not all the details that I wanted. I know it might sound kind of morbid, but I was kind of wanting to see what this thing looked like. Only because it was so unique, I guess. It stood there in the tree line for maybe, 10-15 seconds, and then kind of disappeared deeper into the woods. I was the only person at the house at the time, and I actually wasn't that creeped out. While it was slightly disturbing, I kind of just wrote it off as maybe the darkness playing tricks on my eyes. Maybe the stress and emotional baggage from the bad relationship was causing me to see things that weren't exactly there. I slept on it, and after getting up the next morning, I realized last night was indeed not just stress, but I actually saw something. I've always been a believer in monsters and animals we might not be able to explain, and I've even seen some strange things in my life. But this, my friend, was definitely the strangest I had hands down ever seen. I was on this big adventurous hike to a lake with my friends. We had to walk through at least a couple of miles of woods from where we parked to get to said lake. And for the sake of the story, I'm going to keep the name of the lake anonymous, but I can tell you that it was a very popular lake. Still is. And since I was leading me and my few friends, I was of course in front. And as we're walking through the woods to get to said lake, I noticed something weird. I saw this big shadow, and I looked at it, trying to figure out what it was. I noticed it was kind of watching us from in between some trees, and it stayed perfectly still, so that's why I didn't exactly catch it at first. My first inkling was that it was maybe a man, but the more I looked at it, even with how dark it was, it looked wrong. Now, before I go on, you might be thinking, oh, well, you just saw Bigfoot. But I'm telling you, Bigfoots don't look like this thing did. This had a much more reptile-like appearance. The head was very long. The arms were very long. It kind of reminded me of a serpent head on a human body, with scales and everything, but just dark. After looking at it, I stopped my friends and had them look too, just to make sure I wasn't going crazy. As soon as we all stopped and began gawking at this thing, it immediately tilts its head up to look at us and starts jolting after us. We all start screaming and began running back the way we came. We could hear it chasing after us in the woods, and it caught up very quickly. I mean, it was probably no more than 30 yards away at max, and it was in a section of woods where it wasn't so thick we couldn't see it. It's like it was waiting there for somebody, for us. The thing chased after us though, and it was moving so fast. I didn't think it was possible. We didn't know what to do, so we ran and we ran, and we were able to ran back to where we had initially parked. I was so scared. I mean, all of us were. We were all looking at each other like, did that just happen? What was that? I'm not sure why, but I believe whatever this thing was could have caught up to us and grabbed us. But it didn't. It's like it wanted to chase us out for whatever reason. We were only maybe a half mile in the trail, and we all said that we could all hear it almost right behind us, right in the trees. I'm not sure why it never reached out and tried to grab any of us. That's kind of a mystery to me. So we all get in the car and we drive off, and we're trying to speculate what it was. What animal could it have been? A few of us talked and argued that it was a Bigfoot, but Bigfoots don't look like that. Not that I'm aware of, at least, unless I'm missing something. Yes, we were all terrified, but I strongly feel that this was something else entirely. I don't know if lizard men exist or snake men exist, but that's the closest thing I could even compare it to. It was my son and I, and a friend. We were out trout fishing at a local lake, not too far away from home base. It was a late summer evening, around maybe 9:30, just enough to where it was getting pretty dusky, but not quite dark yet. We were all sitting at the end of a dock fishing, and we had our dog, Jody, with us. He's a sweet boy, a Labrador retriever. We take him on all of our outings. At least we like to think he keeps us safe. He barks whenever there's a predator around, so he does a pretty good job of warning us and warding off any potential danger. And thanks to him, with this encounter, we saw what we did and potentially saved our lives. We're sitting there with our lines in the water, lost in conversation, and we hear Jody start barking and barking at something. I turn my attention, and I see he's barking at the water off to our left. Then I look a little closer, and I see the shape of something large coming up out of the lake. I motion to my friend and my son, and they all look in unison, and we're watching as Jody now begins to bark frantically, going crazy. And then out of the lake steps this horror. I don't even know how to describe it accurately in detail. It kind of reminded me of a half-man, half-alligator. Really ugly and grotesque looking, covered in scales and that thick armor plate that alligators are known for having. It just kind of ascends up out of the water. This elongated face. It turns and looks at us, stares at Jody, and casually walks off into the thicket that's right there, maybe no more than 10 feet from the water. As soon as it fully ascends out of the water and onto the shore, Jody begins whimpering and running back towards us, as he's terrified of whatever creature that is. My son, nearly soiling himself, was screaming, "Dad, Dad, what is that? What did we just see?" And my friend, of course, was silent, as was I. We couldn't really say much, but we all three agreed in unison, "Let's leave." I just didn't feel it was safe there anymore. On the drive back, we all kind of talked about it a little more and said, "Man, I don't know what that thing was, but as soon as we saw it, this feeling of we should leave now, it's not safe. just kind of took over all of us. I mean, had it not, I don't think we would have left. Something was wrong. What that something was, I don't know. Look, I'm not an advocate for the strange and paranormal. I don't believe in ghosts or any of that, or even Bigfoot or strange creatures. But I can't explain this animal. I don't want to go so far as to say it was a lake monster. I feel like that's ridiculous, but I've never seen a reptilian that was bipedal, that also came out of the lake. That was a first for all of us. Let me just say this first and foremost. I'm not a conspiracy person. I don't own a tinfoil hat, metaphorically of course, and I'm a pretty rational, scientific-rooted person. But I have no way to explain away this experience that I had back in 1998. Let me tell you, I was just a sophomore in college, and I was working in a bar in a small town in southwestern Florida. It was a great place, frequented by locals, many of whom I knew and many of whom knew me. We had a lot of regular faces. It was a place where people could get beer and never have to worry about somebody making them feel uncomfortable or getting hit on or getting in a fight. At least, not while on my shifts. It was a fun place. At the time, I was the only girl working there. I was the bartender and the only female that served beer. So, I was the only female that had to work at the bar. The place was a small old building that had originally been a gas station, and years later was converted to the store, and then eventually became a bar. The bar was in the front, and the back of the building held the kitchen, a small office, and the bathrooms. So, enough about that. It was a Saturday night. I was working the bar all by myself, which I was accustomed to. I had worked by myself quite a bit, and I'm not going to lie, I have never made as great as tips as I ever have in my life working that job. But tonight was pretty slow. The place only had a few customers, and I was chatting with a group of maybe 3 people who were sitting there at the bar. Just small talk, just joking around and having fun. I thought I was having a pretty good time until this particular man walked in. He walks up right to the bar and I turn around, cleaning a bar mug. I did not know this man. I'd never seen him before, but there was something interesting about what he wore and the way he looked. I did not know anybody else who knew him. In fact, I wasn't the only one startled by his presence. Everybody in that bar seemed to kind of have that Hollywood movie moment where the guy walks in and where everybody just stops and kind of stares with a blank expression. That's the perfect way to kind of captivate this moment. He sits down, never breaking a stare. I mean, he's a big guy, strong jawline, dark hair. He had a black shirt on and jeans and looked like he had just come from the gym. The thing that struck me the most, though, was his eyes. They were these incredibly dark eyes. Not like fully black or anything, but he just had really stark, contrasty eyes. They were almost hypnotizing, and not in a lustful, romantic way. It was almost like a trance, like he had this power. I know, it's a bizarre description, but that's what it was. He had this very intense look on his face, almost like he was waiting for somebody, me, to say something. So I kind of stood there without a word, just staring back at him, wondering who this guy was. After a little bit, maybe 10 seconds, I nervously just said, "Can I help you?" without him ever breaking his gaze. He just kept stare, smirked a little, and just said, "I think so." Now at this point, I was getting creeped out. His demeanor, his attitude, everything was just weird. I mean, I've worked here already for a while, and no guy has ever just came in here and looked at me like that, without saying anything. I didn't know what he wanted, and I did not know who he was. So, my response was, okay, what do you want?" He paused for a moment. Keep in mind, during this entire interaction, I don't even think I saw the man blink once, let alone break eye contact. It was the creepiest thing. He calmly just says, "I want you," in a very monotone. At this point, not only am I creeped out, but I'm confused. And in the moment and being nervous, I was like, I'm working. What do you want?" He smirked again and said, "I would like to buy you a drink, if you want one." I had to politely kind of shoot him down and say, "Well, I'm working, so I don't drink right now. But maybe if you stick around, you can buy me one later." So he said, "Okay." And he just sat there, looking at the menu. And so now I'm kicking myself for even saying that. Stupid, stupid. Why did I give him such an invitation? Oh gosh, I was a nervous wreck. The people sitting at the bar just kept staring back at me, staring back at him, staring at each other, exchanging glances of confusement and, "Oh boy, she's in trouble" kind of look. He sat there quiet, and I was busy cleaning and doing my job duties. Maybe 45 minutes goes by and he's still sitting there, staring at the menu. I think I asked him, "Have you thought about what you wanted yet?" And as he turns to look back up at me, here's the terrifying part. As he lifts his head up in response to my question, his eyes were not normal. There was something wrong with them. They looked like snake eyes or something. They were this dark green and had these huge black slits in them. And maybe like a half second later, no more than a second, it's almost like they turned normal again. Like the same way an alligator does. You know, how they have those secondary eyelids. It was like a blinking, but not with his actual eyelids. I kind of screamed when I saw it, and kind of flung myself back. He did that blinking thing and his eyes were normal again, just very dark. And he looked puzzled, but still very mono-expressive. Tilted his head very robotically and asked, "What's wrong?" I told him, "You need to get out of here now, or I'm calling the police." Then, without ever breaking eye contact, he slowly stands up, then turns his head and his body, and slowly goes to walk out the door. As he gets to the door, he stops as his hand touches the door, turns around, looks at me again, and says, "It's a shame. You would have made such a great addition." Then immediately turned around and walked out. That was the last I ever saw of him. My skin felt like it was crawling. I was so creeped out. The guys at the bar were like, "Who was that guy?" And I told them, "I don't know." Luckily, my regulars were very kind and nice to me and said, "Hey, we don't know who he was, but we all got the creeps. We'll stay here late if you'd like to close to protect you." I thought that was very kind, and I took all three guys up on the offer. And they stayed with me until my shift ended at around 1 or 2 in the morning, kept me company. The guy never reappeared. So that's my college story. Now, here's an important note. Fast forward almost 10 years to about 2009, and my aunt is very big, still is by the way, into the paranormal and things like conspiracy theories, reptilians, all that kind of stuff. Nothing that I really ever pay attention to. But I guess she was telling me there are these beings called reptilians. They apparently have the ability to shapeshift into people. I kind of laughed the notion off at first, and then she went on to show me some clips. People being caught on camera, like newscasters and TV hosts and celebrities, except their eyes change, and she showed me that. I felt my skin crawl again. That memory of that night instantly came back to me. That's exactly what I saw that night. I didn't tell my aunt anything. I mean, I always thought she was kind of crazy, but I just kind of shot her down and was like, "Yeah, that's terrifying." But I knew deep down, something was wrong with that man. I can't sit here and say with concrete evidence that was exactly the case, but the resemblance to the video she showed me, to what his eyes looked like and his strange odd behavior, sure is uncanny how close they're related. Hi, what lurks beneath? Before I tell you this, I trust you'll keep my name anonymous, and my location anonymous as well. And I also trust that you'll at least hear me out. and if I'm lucky, read my story. I know you're a busy man, and so I bet with all the stories you get, you probably don't have much time. Well, here's mine, and feel free to use it if you'd like. I lived in the swampy areas of Illinois for a very long time. I was deer hunting in the swamps, well, about 3 years ago now. This day in particular was very foggy, and I was busy walking along a path in the swamp. I heard a noise that was not something I'm used to hearing. It was like this very fast pitter-pattering, except the pitter-pattering was not that of light weight. These were heavy, more like thuds against the ground. I knew it was something because, again, I never heard anything like this before. Thinking maybe it was an alligator, I got down, crouching and listening for a moment. It was actually coming up in the trees around me, not on the ground. I'm thinking to myself, what the? And then I hear branches kind of breaking and moving up in the trees around me. So I get up from a crouched position, and I'm looking around. Instantly, as I turn behind me, I see these glowing pairs of eyes looking at me. This was during the day, mind you, so my visibility wasn't exactly poor. What I was looking at, I have no explanation for. It was just this big creature. It looked very dinosaur-like, if I can describe it. I had a hard time seeing the entirety of the thing, even though the light was good, because of how it was holding onto the tree. It was kind of crouched, on a large branch, actually, higher up in the trees. It had a pretty big head, and looked to be bigger and taller than I was. I didn't waste any time. I ran back to my truck, and I've never really sat down to tell anybody this before. But I know what I saw, and it was not a deer. What this thing was, I don't know. To me, it reminded me of some failed genetic experiment somebody tried to do by splicing human and dinosaur DNA. Sure, it sounds like a science fiction plot gone wrong, but that's what I saw. This was back in 2016. I was with my friend Josh on a run in the Pine Barrens in southern New Jersey. It was a cool autumn morning. The sun was out, and the leaves were just starting to change color. And it was the perfect morning for a run. We were running a trail, just for exercise and to get some good fresh air. A nice brisk pace always helps the body. And this particular trail was slightly challenging, with it being uphill. We were both talking about how nice it was out and how much we enjoyed being out here in the woods. So, here's a quick note, before I go any further with my story. Yes, I'm aware that Pine Barrens is home to all sorts of strange stories and encounters. Things like UFO sightings and bright lights, alien abductions, Bigfoots, and yes, even the Jersey Devil. I've heard it all. But I've never experienced anything myself. Never seen anything, never felt anything weird, and I've lived here for a long time. Not all my life, but enough time in the Pine Barrens, hiking and running around, that I feel like if those things were true, I would have seen something, at least by now. Well, that mentality that I had was proven wrong this day. As I was saying, we were running on this trail when, up ahead of us, we see something. Now bear in mind here, this is what we saw. We saw something big climbing out of the ground. At first, we kind of stopped thinking, what is this? But it happened very fast. This large, lizard-like thing pulled itself out of the ground within a matter of seconds, like it just kind of dug itself out. Think of how in the movies where it shows, zombies digging themselves out of a grave and pulling themselves up. It was similar to that, but it was way faster. It was like a slick, solid motion of just arms out, body coming up out of the ground, boom. I feel like the phrase pooping bricks is a severe understatement to how Josh and I felt. We were frozen, as this being had pulled itself out of the ground, and its expression was kind of stunned and shocked that we were there. like it wasn't sure how to react to the fact that we had seen it. And we were kind of just locked in this stare for, I don't know, maybe 5 seconds before Josh just grabs me and takes off going the opposite direction. My body reacted and we both ran as fast as we could. Somehow, we managed not to scream, and I'm really surprised I didn't scream like a little girl after seeing what we did. We get all the way back down the trail and get back to the parking lot. We stop and try to catch our breath. After heaving and breathing heavily, maybe a minute goes by and we're finally able to breathe enough to where we can ask each other, "What was that? Did you see that? Oh my gosh, oh my gosh." And yeah, I can't believe we saw that. What was that? None of us knew. None of us could even think about what it could have been. Like I told you already, I have lived here for at least 10 plus years and have never even heard or seen of anything remotely like that. Let me give you a good description of what it was since we had such a good view of it. This thing was a dark green, almost black, and it was covered in scales. It had a body similar to a man, but very large clawed hands and feet, and the head was almost kind of like a velociraptor, at least in shape. The eyes were a very contrasty yellow, very piercing, actually. We never saw any teeth, but I guess the best description, I would call it, is a dinosaur man, because it was like half man, half dinosaur, I guess. I also didn't see its teeth, but this thing was also ripped. I mean, through its scales, you could see its rippling muscles, all over its arms, all over its chest and stomach. I did not see any genitalia. It was not wearing any clothing or anything to cover that. I don't know what it was, and I don't want to go back in those woods to find out, if we're honest. In my early teens, my brother and I would always go out to the backwoods to hunt for treasure. We often implored the use of a metal detector. We found all sorts of cool but useless stuff in hindsight. Bottle caps, old knives, cans, forks, things like that. Nothing too exciting, but as a teenager, it was like striking gold. The adventure would usually start with us being out after dark, coming home muddy and exhausted. I mean, hey, it got us out into the woods and burned a lot of calories in the process. I guess this is why we always stayed in shape, which would come in handy for what would happen in this story. Let me just take a brief moment and explain the layout of the land. Our father owned a vast amount of acreage on the backside of our property. You had multiple creeks, and it kind of dipped down and you go further and further back, and then the land kind of goes up into a hill. Once you get to the top of this gradual slope, you could go back down again into a deeper section of valley that was all just forest upon forest. Now, during the fall season, my father would use these areas as hunting, and even had multiple deer stands set up all throughout there. My brother and I never really ventured that far out. I mean, we're talking hundreds of acres here. So, we generally stayed within maybe a mile or two at most of our own house. Don't quote me on the distance thing though. I really have no way to verify that measurement. It's just from my recollection. So, we often had this evening ritual. We'd be out there pretty much all day, playing and trying to look for stuff to hunt for treasure with, and of course, using our trusty metal detector. By about evening time, sometimes we would sit and relax, my brother and I, on top of the far back large hill, and just kind of hear the crickets slowly fade into the night, and see the weather and sky change. It was always really peaceful. Sometimes, well, more often than not, we would actually see foxes and deer. I can't dismiss it that it was really cool. But there was one night that I feel for me and my brother, but I can't speak for him. It kind of changed things. So we had a fairly normal day of hunting for treasure, and again, I don't believe we found anything extraordinary, at least not that I can recall. We were doing our usual of sitting atop this large hill, looking out into the night valley, or should I say almost night. That's when we started to hear sounds from the hill below us. Something big moving around, My brother was the first one to hear it, as it got his attention first. He starts looking in that direction and knocks me on the shoulder, saying, "Hey, listen." And you could hear something big moving around. We thought it might be a buck or something, just due to the amount of noise it was making. But you could hear it was moving. And you could hear it wasn't walking, like the way a deer would. It was two-legged, whatever it was. And so now we're both really curious, trying to look through the trees and see if we can see anything. But we don't see anything. At this point, in the sky, it's pretty dusk. It's not totally black out yet, but it's getting dark. And my brother and I were never afraid of walking back to the house at night, since we knew this part from the hill back to our house pretty well, and we were pretty hardy teenagers. We just kept thinking, there's no way somebody's back here. I mean, the only way to access it is you'd have to go all the way around, maybe another 40 or so acres in either direction. And quite frankly, if somebody was out here, they would have a lantern or some sort of flashlight. And there's really nothing out here. It's not hunting season. There's nothing of value. There's no reason why anybody should be back here. And the other thing is this movement sounded like it was coming from something very large, much bigger than just a man. All these thoughts are going through my head, and I'm sure my brother's at the same time. And we're looking, and we're looking. And then, my brother and I at the same time in unison see these red glowing eyes just appear down in the bottom of the hill, and they're moving up towards us. I believe again my brother sees it first, and he hits me on the shoulder, and he says, "Look," and points. And we both see it. This figure, this tall figure is coming towards us with red eyes. I remember saying, "What is that?" And it gets closer and closer. And I think at this point, we were both so scared we couldn't even get up to move. I know the natural instinct is to probably get up and run. But when you're that terrified, on a primal fear level, it's different. It grounds you in a way that you can't physically react like you're supposed to. It got closer and closer, till the shadows and darkness of the tree coverage became lighter and lighter, and we could start to make out what it was. It's almost like the lack of darkness allowed this thing to be illuminated by whatever little light there was supplied by the stars and the moon. My brother and I got a front row show to the horror of whatever this creature was, that certainly was far from anything human. And after seeing it with my own eyes, which I later verified with my brother in verbatim to make sure we saw the same thing, this looked like some sort of lizard alien thing. I'm not sure what else you would call it, to be honest. But I can tell you, it had a flat face, slitted pupils, large red-yellow eyes, a very reptilian-shaped like head. It was very tall, not really built strong, full of muscles, like you would see in a bodybuilder, but more so very lanky in its torso and its arms and legs. And it had this large tail behind it. It was kind of like a large lizard man, I guess, if that's the best way to describe it. It never opened up its mouth, so I never saw any teeth. But I could tell that its face, like I said, was flat, and the nose had slits. It also never made any sounds, other than the crunching of leaves and coming up from the brush. It was maybe, 50 feet away from us, when my brother manages to jump up, grab me by the collar, and yank me and pull me. Somehow, like kick-starting a motor. That's all my legs needed in order to run back to the house. And at this point, it was dark. Maybe not pitch black, but darker. And the second we go running down the hill, back towards the slope up to our property, we can hear this thing now picking up its pace, chasing us, running behind us, and it's gaining quickly. Trust me, I did not look back. I know all about that. I was not going to risk that happen, and falling and tripping over a rock, and just being bait for whatever this thing was. Again, it never screamed or let any noise, just that it gave chase. We made it to the bottom of this hill, and the gradual slope back up to our house. I think it must have stopped either way, somewhere along before we hit the bottom, because afterwards we didn't see it anymore or hear it, and I really have no idea what it was. We'd made it back, just in time. Our parents weren't home, and so I didn't want to tell them anything anyway. I talked to my brother, asked him, what do you think that was? Because we both saw the same thing. We're not crazy. We didn't just see stuff. We did not hallucinate. That thing was as real as flesh and blood can get. And it's safe to say we didn't sleep that much that night. As terrified as I was from the whole experience, I tried to think analytically. Like, okay, this is obviously some sort of large predatory animal, bipedal or not. Then I start thinking about the logistics. Well, there's a lot of food back there. Tons of deer, tons of bear and foxes, lots of food, lots of places to go undisturbed and hide. If there's anywhere there'd be some sort of creature like this, that backside of the property is exactly where you would find one. Although, I'm sure that my father has maybe had sightings himself, but he would never tell us, I'm sure. We had gone back there since multiple times, and yes, even at dusk, but we never saw this thing again. You might call me either brave or stupid for going back there, especially at dark. But, you know, when you're a teenager, you think you're practically invincible, as we did. We felt that if we had a Bowie knife and the proper tools, we would be more equipped to handle a situation like that, which we kept on us all the time from that point forward, but never encountered it again, whatever it was. Ever since I was a small boy, I would often go hunting with my father outside of New Orleans in the swamps. One night, we were looking for game when my father found an alligator that began to appear. I couldn't tell you if alligator hunting was in any way illegal, but my dad took a shot at it, killing it right there in the spot, shooting it right between the eyes. We went over to see if we could get some meat off of it, when suddenly, from the bushes, this man-sized lizard appeared. Dark in color, having big orange eyes reminiscent to that of a cat, and reeking of decaying meat. My father instantly started shaking as he slowly placed down his shotgun. This pterodactyl-looking thing hissed at us and began to move quickly towards us. That's when we realized it was actually moving towards the dead alligator my father had just shot. My father picked up his shotgun, aimed at it, pulling the trigger, but the shotgun jammed. All of a sudden, we heard something behind us, realizing there was more of these things walking the distance towards us. The one in front had now picked up this dead alligator, began to tear its skull open, and eating the meat, like brain matter and such, in front of us. We stood there in shock. It kind of reminded me of something that had torn a turtle open, eating the fresh meat. The one behind us gained distance quickly, leaping, knocking my father over. I ran as fast as I could, hoping it wouldn't give chase to me and leave my parents alone. There was blood all over from where this thing had scratched me while leaping over. These things let my father go. I think they were so preoccupied with the dead alligator. My dad came running up behind me while these things stole his kill, disappearing off into the swamp. I don't know what they were, but I sure hope that nobody has to ever experience such a thing again. The weird thing is, this happened in the 1980s, right around the same time that boy from Skateboard Swamp saw that strange reptilian being running after him. I have no idea if they're the same thing or not. During my junior year of high school in Denver, Colorado, I had an encounter with a reptilian being. It was October 12th, 2003. While going to catch the bus for school, something odd happened that would forever change my life. while walking to the bus stop. It was around 7 a.m. when suddenly, this very tall being appears out of the woodline. Quick note, the thick brush in which this figure appeared from has kind of marshes beyond it. So I see this figure, and I can't quite make out what it is at first, but I realize whatever this figure is has scales, visible scales, and it's walking upright, just like a man would. Curious, but also very creeped out. I ignore it for a moment, try to pull out my phone, which at the time was a Nokia brick phone, only to discover the battery is dead. Upon putting my phone back in my pocket, I decide to see that I'm going to see who this is, assuming it was a person who was thinking they were clever, walking around in some sort of Halloween costume. I figured it was a little early for Halloween, but you never know. Sometimes you get those weirdos walking around. As I get closer, this thing looks like someone's nightmare. Its skin was scalier than I had first thought, and it had these little horns on top of its head and back. Not like probably what you're imagining. Not like ram horns or anything, but these little spikes, I guess if that's how I can describe them. But most impressively were the whites of its eyes. They were like slit pupils. Now, I have never been afraid of anything before, but something told me in my gut I needed to run, and now. I started running through the lot behind me, trying to get away from whatever this thing was, when suddenly a car passes by slowly. This thing didn't even seem to notice me, but turned to get a better look at the passing car. When it did, I noticed that its face was more human than I thought. When I saw its face and got a look more intently, I felt weird, beginning running faster to my house. Now, I'm not sure if this being is still there or not. It's been almost 20 years, but by the time I reached my front door, I don't think it was following me anymore. Now, I had heard of weird stuff happening in my neighborhood. Other kids whom I went to school with would always joke about what they would call as the Green Man, supposedly a tall green lizard man who stalked the marshes and woods. I always thought it was ridiculous, and I'm not saying that's what I saw, but I'm going to tell you what happened next. So I started to tell my best friends about what I had saw. Some of them believed me, some of them did not. But I think they could see how much it affected me. I mean, hell, I missed that whole day of school, and I wasn't going to dare tell my parents about what I witnessed. They would never believe me. In fact, they probably would have assumed I was on drugs or dropping LSD. The only choice I really had at the time was to share it with a few of my close friends, and primarily keeping it to myself, until all these years later, when I developed an interest in cryptozoology and the paranormal, thanks to sources like YouTube, which allow everybody and anybody to share their personal encounter stories and experiences. This is when I learned recently that I am not alone at all. In fact, I'm not crazy, because I battled with that for years, convincing myself that it was just a strong hallucination, or a bad nightmare, or a very vivid nightmare, I should say. Anyway, after hearing and learning everything that I have, and spending copious amount of hours researching and diving deep into my past, I believe that reptilians are real. Maybe not in the traditional sense, where it's humans transforming into reptile creatures, but maybe reptilian cryptids are an actual thing. I stand firm on my stance, primarily because I've seen one with my own eyes. I'm a hobbyist and a paranormal investigator. I wanted to take some time and share with you an encounter story that I've recently come to know from a man in the state of Alabama. This man had an encounter near his home with what he claims was a reptilian that he said was about 10 feet tall. And it had left 3 claw marks on the hood of his truck in a fierce showdown. It apparently tried to kill the man, but was unsuccessful. He, however, was successful in getting away. What made this the scariest of all is that there were other witnesses to this strange event. The description given by those who saw the same thing as the man were the same. The witnesses were his wife and older son. The man was terrified of what he saw that afternoon. He claimed that this thing climbed right out of the swamps, went right for him. They kind of had a brawl, where he shot at this thing multiple times, trying to get it to go away. The man deeply admitted to being terrified of what he saw, and if this thing wanted to kill him, it could have easily done so. This reptilian cryptid, as described by the witness, was around 8 to 10 feet tall, grayish to green scaly skin, shark-like teeth in its mouth, large hands with 3 claws each, and long protruding spikes all over its back, with a long tail covered in barbs or thorns. Its eyes were red, with yellow like slits for pupils. It looked extremely angry. The thing was supposedly able to climb trees and also walked around on 2 legs, like a man would, very comfortably. The witness says that the thing had a horrible, sickening smell that emitted from it. You could smell it before it was even showing up. It smelled bad. The mom and son just kept saying how horrible the smell was, and they never want to have another encounter with whatever this was. The witness was so terrified after the incident, he and his family moved away from the area. The family actually now lives in northern Florida with their relatives in order to avoid that property and area altogether. When I spoke to the witness, he claimed there was lots of swampland that surrounded that specific county. Lots of deer, lots of hunting. He said the surrounding county is very rural. A lot of people like to hunt there. He prefers living in northern Florida. He doesn't want another reptilian encounter experience. He doesn't want to be that close to those swamps, especially after his family had their very first and only encounter. Now, the man also claims that what he saw was not a human in a suit, but something else. Something dark. Something from another world. When they were being attacked, he also admits that he got a look at the creature. The man said that his wife described it exactly the way he did. It was hideous. She was hiding inside, afraid of what might happen if she stepped outside or what to do. She said, though, too, she also smelt the foul odor before she ever saw it, and even when she saw it and after it disappeared. Her description of its claws were also identical to the man. She described them as 3 claws, which resembled retractable knives coming out of each hand. It was also reported making a loud shrieking noise as it approached. She said her husband is lucky that this thing let him get away. If anyone else has had a sighting or an encounter story that you know regarding something like this, I'd appreciate any information you could share with me, because here, there is something very strange, and if we don't have photographic evidence, at least not yet, we won't be able to prove this thing exists, which we're wanting to do. So if you ever come across some, please don't hesitate to share some with me. Thank you. My sighting happened in June of 2012. My father was undergoing chemo, and I decided to bring him out into the canoe for an afternoon trip. We headed downriver to a secluded spot that we had been on once before. On our way there, my dog started acting funny, sniffing the ground and barking. That's when this large lizard thing began coming out of the trees. I began screaming, pointing at this creature, wondering what we were seeing. My father grabbed our canoe paddles, and I began screaming for him to paddle us away. But this thing kept coming towards us. Now, it was sifting quickly through the water, toward us, like some big water snake. Not swimming though, more flowing, until it was only about 10 feet away from the canoe. Its head and body were above the waterline. Then, my dad reached in his pocket for something. I hear a gunshot go off, and a spray of blood shot out of this creature. The sight made me almost vomit. Then, it just sank down under the water. I blacked out after that for some time, in complete and utter terror. The next thing I know, we are at our destination and my father is asking if I'm okay. That's when he tells me what happened. I'm shooting this creature, and then this thing disappearing underneath the water. I had fainted, I was so terrified. My dad explained to me something large had come through us and at us through the water. He wasn't sure what it was. My dad was pale. I mean, I've never seen him like that before. Now, fast forward 15 years later, and my oldest son believes he'd seen a similar creature when he was out in the forest with his own friends. He was rounding up this group of kids when he saw something that looked like a lizard. He said it stared at him for a moment, when they all became aware of what he was seeing. The creature darted off. My son, who is now 21, has never told anybody about this until I mentioned my own sighting to him, not knowing if it was the same thing. It's weird because his friends and parents had reported their strange, large, three-toed tracks around their house at nighttime. They would find these large feces piles as well, large scratches along the house of the trees. I can only suspect it's this thing. It's hanging around here. Look, I don't know if we somehow stumbled upon its territory or what, but I know it's here. My son has also seen it several more times since his initial sighting. The last time was not too long ago. He said this thing is beginning to get very, very violent. It's been destroying people's property, attacking and killing dogs. I'm still in shock by what we all saw those years ago, and never once did I ever believe in this kind of thing until that day. Now I know for sure it existed and will continue to exist. I know I'm going to be attacked for what I'm saying, but if there's anybody else out there that has seen this thing, let me know. We need some answers. I'm not much of a believer in cryptids, but I do feel that whatever this was could have been some sort of large lizard. Here's my story. I believe I came up to a close encounter with what I would say is a lizard man. It was in my hometown of Amarillo, Texas. I'm 25 years old, male, from the US. I currently work at Walmart as a manager, and have been for about 5 years now. Coming home from work late at night one evening, I reside next to a large apartment complex. There's a few ponds around it, lots of trees, and on this night, I noticed something moving very fast toward the building. It was springtime, and all this time of year, everything is coming out in full bloom. As I'm pulling closer, that's when I noticed movement from something very large, I think coming out by one of the ponds closer to my house. I had a good view of it. I was about 50 yards from this thing. Now, it looked like a very large lizard man, kind of running on all fours. It was running impossibly fast across the pavement toward the building and the swimming pool area. The thing ran on its hind legs, after running on 4, and quickly shifted to 2, halfway through the road. It had a very thin body, with short, stubby front arms, but longer, skinny back legs. The feet appeared to be webbed, kind of like a duck would, and they were also scaled, and it had a long, slender tail that it dragged behind it. I would say lizard man, but I don't know what it was. It looked to be about maybe 6 feet high, and it had cat-like eyes. They looked bright yellow. I felt very uneasy by watching it. I'm not much of a believer, but the sighting changed for me. There's no way this was a person playing Halloween. I think that's impossible. I looked around and saw the lizard man running away from me, just before it dove into the night, not to be seen again. It was a really eerie feeling, knowing that there was something else out there that I did not know anything about. I wasn't alone, like ever. This experience changed me, and changed my habits of how I live when I got home. So, if you see something, don't be afraid to report it. This could happen to anybody. I'm even weird about how I use the term lizard man, because I know it sounds so ridiculous, but that's exactly what it looks like. As a matter of fact, this thing looked like it stepped off the Hollywood stage of a horror movie. I mean, that's just how realistic this thing looked. Creepy. Now, as far as I know, there are no other reports or stories by anyone that I've heard of that has heard about this. I know Bigfoot is a thing, but I've never seen one, or any of those. However, this lizard man phenomenon is something different. I'll try and spend some time searching around and see if I can't maybe find any more stories. I'm sure I'm not the only one to have seen this thing. I just hope I don't ever have to see it again. One evening, I was driving home from work. My wife was sitting in the passenger seat of my car. We were on our way to pick up a pizza, as we both had a late night of work. Suddenly, this huge creature in the form of a gigantic lizard reptile thing leapt out onto the highway and began running towards our car. We slam on the brakes, and it runs right past us. I think I just reacted, because most people would floor it. We got a brief look at it before it disappeared into the bush on the other side of the road. We were both in total shock for about 5 minutes before we pulled back onto the highway. We did make it back home, telling our kids what we had just seen, and that it was really scary. But we didn't tell them what exactly we thought it was. Since we were both in shock, we tried to shoot ideas of what we think it could have been. My wife was crying, she was so scared. And of course, I too was terrified. I'm not sure what it was, but I know that it wasn't a bear, or a mountain lion, or a deer, or a man. I've never in my life heard or seen anything about upright walking reptiles that are native to the United States. I've never heard of in my life any sort of reptile that could have fit this description. It's like it was something from outer space. The next morning, I started frantically looking up information on reptiles when I came across something called a cryptid. Apparently, there are reptilian cryptids, if I'm saying that right, that have been sighted a lot in this part of Texas for years now. I had no idea. It really got me thinking about how crazy this world really is, and all the things we don't know. I started doing research into the creature, and found some more interesting things. I guess this is a kind of alien, and is often referred to as a reptilian. On average, they're about 7 to 9 feet tall and walk upright, which is actually pretty close to what we saw. It has been known to walk around on 4 legs as well. It's often dark and scaly. The creature is also said to be sometimes spotted with horns, large nostrils, and eyes like a snake. We didn't really see the face much, but the head kind of reminded me of a lizard. Anyway, this thing is reported to apparently attack people, or lie in wait, when it feels threatened. I guess there have been many eyewitnesses, in the southern states especially, for years now. Other than that night, I have never encountered one before. I was terrified at first, but beginning to think it's just another ghost story, like the ghost of St. Augustine, where it's a woman in white. I don't know. The whole thing is just so confusing. I don't talk about what happened much because people just won't believe me. I haven't encountered a cryptid that is similar to those described in this article. I'm not sure what it is or what it was, but it seemed, again, like something from outer space. I think that makes more sense to me than what we had encountered. I think it's a strange alien being. I don't talk about this with anyone else, because who else is going to believe me and my wife? So I'm thankful I was able to reach out to you from this article. It's been really eye-opening to find out about all these cryptid creatures. I'm still not sure what we saw, but it makes sense that it was an alien. I don't want to scare people or anything. I just wanted to share my story and let people know they're not alone in seeing these creatures out there, if they do. This encounter story happened on November 22nd, 2013. Rural Indiana. This person was going into the forest to investigate some strange noises that they had heard. That day, they had been standing at the edge of a forest near the house, apparently chilly but sunny, and there were puffy clouds and a bright blue sky. They liked being outside on a nice fall day like this, so they weren't planning on going back inside for a while. There was just too much to do. So they were working on practicing their archery skills with some new arrows that they had bought earlier, when suddenly, something strange interrupted them. Through the trees, they heard an odd sound that resembled several things at once. It seemed to be part screeching bird, part human shriek, part banshee scream. And although none of those are actually very similar sounds in themselves, all of them were in there together. Listening carefully, it seemed to be coming up from the mountain. So they went around the corner of the forest and began to climb up this small rocky slope. When they were approaching the source of the noise, it was growing louder and more distant. Suddenly, they came over this small rise in the landscape and stopped short. There stood a strange creature that was reported to be about 12 feet tall. It had this nasty scaly skin, yellow eyes that reflected back. Its head looked like that of an alligator, only bigger. It turned to this person, noticing them right away, and although they made eye contact, it started to hypnotize them, or so the person would describe. In fact, this individual describes being kind of lured towards up here, which is why they came this area, climbed up the rocky slope, and to see this thing. The oddest thing of all, instead of running away though, they found themselves moving closer and closer to it, while it moved in their direction. Before they ever met up, there was one more very strange thing that occurred. They appeared to be in a hypnotic state, being lured ever closer to this strange creature. They walked forward, hypnotized, and when they got to about 8 or 9 feet from this thing, they were convinced this creature was going to kill them. They don't know what happened, but something in their minds snapped, and the trance was broken. They turned around to run, but it was too late. Their legs would not work, so they just stood there while this creature came closer and closer. There were 2 rows of teeth they reported in its mouth, like that of a shark. But then, just as it lunged and was about to bite, it started letting out this horrendous scream. They would later learn that it was because, or so they believed, that the chewing tobacco was such a strong odor, it hated the smell. It's a very odd conclusion, but it's the only thing that this witness could possibly think of. As it got closer, it kind of made a face like it got a whiff of something he didn't like. This eyewitness had a large dip in, as well as a can of chew in their coat pocket when this happened. So that's the only evidence we can really guess or go by. They were not going to risk it. They took their chance and fled as fast as possible to escape. Absolutely terrified by what they saw. Nothing like this had ever happened to them before, and they didn't know what to do. They don't really know what it was. They don't want to see it again. They were successful in making their way back to the truck and driving themselves home without a problem. They're not sure what they saw, but all they could say is it was very scary. They will say this though. They've had friends that have gone out in these parts and have had very similar sightings and experiences. It's possible too that they saw the thing that this person described. Now, I'm going to go ahead and end this encounter story. This story was shared to me by a family relative. I'm just passing it along. While I won't mention their blood relation to me, they are a close relative, and they wish to remain anonymous, and asked me if I could share their story. They're not too good at typing, so they told it to me by ear and had me do this for them. They're big listeners of your show, and they appreciate all the episodes you put out. They want to give you a big thank you. And hopefully, just hopefully, you get to read this to your audience. This was not that long ago, pre-COVID. I was out hunting in the woods with my good friend Mike, so we'll call him, and we decided to take a break on a fallen tree. I saw something ever so briefly coming through the trees, which caught my eye, so I pointed at it, trying to tell Mike what I'd seen. He looked where I pointed but said he didn't see anything. But then his mouth fell open. He cried out, as we watched this thing move stealthily toward us. Then we could see it. It had red eyes, scales, and it kind of looked like an upright walking alligator. Its hands were very similar to that too, having 4 to 5 large claws on each hand. You could believe that by seeing something like this, nobody would believe us, and we were completely terrified. I'm surprised I didn't soil my pants. We both just reacted, turned up, and ran like hell. This thing started chasing us. All the while, if you were able to see my face, you would have seen the pure terror on it. I've never been that scared before. It was a primal level of fear. Me and Mike just kept running, not even stopping once, until about half an hour later, when we were still running, or so I like to believe. I say that because I lost track of time, but I just remember running and running and running, and this thing following us and not stopping. It was relentless. I do remember at one point Mike tripping and falling, and I had to go back and pick him up, although I couldn't see what this thing was. But we're asking, what was that thing? As he was shouting with fear in his voice. We had just straight up witnessed something out of a horror movie. We got out of there, but we still talk about it now and then. I think we're convinced that we must have stumbled upon this thing's territory at some point. I mean, we've never imagined something like this ever before. The section of woods we went out to is where we've gone and gallivanted many times before, from hunting to just having a bonfire. I don't know where this thing came from, where it lives, and I don't care. I don't want to see it again. One night, my friend and I were driving through eastern Texas late at night. We were on our way to Austin from Oklahoma. It's a pretty long drive, 700 miles each way. Along the route, we saw what looked like a large man walking along the highway. He appeared to be carrying something in his right hand, so we thought he might have been walking back from maybe a party or something. But as we got closer, we could tell it wasn't a human, but some sort of person in a reptile suit. But they were about 7 feet tall. And the closer we got, and the more our headlights illuminated him or it, something just seemed so off. First off, this was a long stretch of road, with nothing out here. Why would somebody be walking around out here in the middle of the night in a lizard costume? But the closer we got, we could begin to see that the suit or costume this man was supposedly wearing looked very realistic. So I figured I would blow the horn, maybe get his attention. And as soon as I did, I regretted it. I say it because I don't know if it has a gender or what it was, but it turned to face us. That's when I realized this was not somebody in a costume. This was some failed science experiment or something. And I could tell that whatever was in its hand was part of a dead animal. I couldn't tell what. I want to say maybe a dead fox. This was real and definitely not a human. I am one of those people who believe in these things, but I'm writing this testimony because for some reason, something inside me told me to do so. I don't know if I'm ever going to go back there again. And ever since that experience of August 1st, 2014, I can close my eyes and still see the look on his face, at us running away and him holding something, which looked like a large animal. Now, before I even got up to him, we were doing about 80 miles an hour, and when we saw him and the headlights off in the distance, we began to slow down. Now, when he turned his face around and looked at us, his eyes were beet red. They looked like they had been lit up by fire, although it's impossible. There were no lights around. He looked like he wasn't supposed to exist or be real, like he looked like he walked off a movie set. If I can be real with you, it reminded me of a creature you'd see in one of those 2000 sci-fi movies on the Sci-Fi Channel. Not animatronic, but not in a costume either. Just very realistic. Anyway, on another occasion, my friend and I were sitting around at night, having some drinks and talking about how glad we were to not be driving through the country during this time. Who knows what might be out there lurking, waiting for us. Pretty soon, our conversation turned to more serious matters, like Bigfoot, UFOs, and paranormal, both of which we're all very interested in. All of a sudden, we heard some very loud footsteps, as if somebody was running outside. We both got up, turned off the lights to see if we could see anything, although we couldn't. I feel like from now on, I'll try and be more aware of what's happening. Not just at night, but thinking about all these things that go down during the day. Sometimes I wonder if they are coming closer to civilization. Or is it me? Or am I the only one who feels this way? One thing is for sure. I'll really try and never let my guard go down again. Because while driving down some empty backcountry road late at night, you'll wake up sometimes with goosebumps, thinking about what might be out there. I know I'll never forget that encounter. I live about 40 minutes away from Syracuse. I had a sighting with this black snake-like creature that was upright like a man, 6 foot tall, and I saw it running into the woods when I made eye contact with it. About 2 years prior to this sighting, I saw some red eyes at night, off of Buckley Road. Now, these eyes were pretty high up from the ground, and very close together. At the time, I thought it was just eye shine, but after this encounter, I'm thinking it was more than that. Not that it was an eye shine, but more so what it came from. Definitely not a deer, like I may have thought it to be then. I'm sorry there's not a lot to my story, but the being in which I saw was very, very strange. To be honest, I've never shared this story with anybody before, but after listening to all your stories on how other people have seen these similar reptilian creatures, I don't really know if I'm scared anymore. It's comforting to know I'm not alone in having these strange sightings, and I'm glad to know that when you see them, it doesn't always mean you're going to get hurt. Somehow this makes me feel safer. I guess thank you for any helpful information you might have. I used to be a resident of Texas, actually, and although I'm currently in Colorado, I still have family down there. But that's not the part that concerns me, so let's go over with what does. My sister was studying at the university in Texas, and she started telling me about strange things going on at where she has lived. She's told me stories about finding large clawed footprints out in her yard and pastures, seeing strange lights at night through her windows, especially since she kind of lives out in the country. There's no streetlights or nothing, and the weird lights kind of come and go. She's not a believer in the paranormal or UFOs, so she's pretty unconvinced, but does find the sightings and lights very strange. I've dismissed these claims as nothing more than paranoia at the time, or maybe an overactive imagination, until one time, visiting my parents, who are actually in Cedar Hill. This was in 2014, by the way. I had heard noises outside that sounded somewhat like growls at first, but as the night went on, I realized they were far too deep to be anything other than something maybe like a bear. The prints were the same prints my sister had been seeing. They looked wrong. I remember my father grabbing his flashlight, heading out to see what was making these noises, while my mother and I stayed put inside. I heard him go out there, and kind of mumbling to himself for a minute. Then it went quiet. Then he runs back in, and he describes to us seeing a creature around 5'10", covered from head to toe in dark black to green scales, looking almost like the reflection of moonlight. It had a very large muscular build, 3 sharp claws in each hand, and a mouth full of fangs. My dad was so pale. The thing apparently snarled at him and retreated back into the tree line. My dad described it like he caught it doing something, and it seemed startled. So who knows what that's all about. But I've never seen him so scared out of his mind before in my life. He told me he has no idea what that thing was, and only remembers it making a horrible, high-pitched scream before disappearing. We came to find out the next day that this creature had been seen on their property in recent days by their neighbors. My parents didn't have a camera system, so we had no way to make that proof. Of course, we didn't find out about the whole neighbor seeing this thing until later. My dad still does not know what it was, or why it would just up and visit his house like that, out of nowhere. I tried to research and look up reptiles native to Texas, which are obviously quite a few, and nothing really fit, except large lizards, such as the monitor lizards, which aren't supposed to be here anyway. So at least there's that much. But that doesn't even begin to describe what this being looked like. The interesting bit is my father described the strange lizard man creature as having a very human face, as he described it. He also made note that it looked highly intelligent. It gets more strange than that. My sister came across the story of a girl who saw some kind of creature near her home. This was also in Texas, back in 2013. She found the story on Facebook, printing out the story to show my father, so he'd know that she wasn't just making up her own stories or anything. Of course, her showing him that was before his own sighting, because he didn't believe it at the time. He brought this article over to me, and I got back home. I wasn't sure what to make of it at the time. My grandmother, who's also from Dallas, but has since moved away now, she told us that she used to see unexplained lights all the time outside of her house, and she lives in Garland. I don't know much about these reptilian entities, but if they really are real, I'd like to know why there's so much activity around Dallas. My grandmother explained to me that she used to see lights outside of her house all the time late at night. And sometimes, when she'd look out the window, there would be this large creature standing there in the street, peering in at her, as if it wanted to come in, but wouldn't. At first, this obviously terrified her, until one day she realized that whatever this thing is, it, I guess, wasn't harmful. It just stood there, glowing yellow eyes, with some sort of horrific expression, like it just wanted to scare my grandmother. She got after it. She would cuss at it, open the door and yell it, tell it to go away. It never would. It would just stand there and watch her. One time, she even called my grandfather, who was at work, and he said there was nothing out there with her. Of course, she would keep looking out the window again to see if it had gone away, but no. It would still just stand in the street, like its feet were rooted to the ground while she watched it. And this went on for years, until she finally moved away out of that house. We have no idea what that's all about. Now, when I told my grandmother about what had happened to my sister and us the one night, she got really quiet, asked me not to tell anybody else. People might think we're crazy. After all, we got some of those looks after telling a few friends what had happened. And just last week, I saw more news stories pop up on these lizard men seen outside of Dallas. I did another search online, where they described them as having green skin, bulging eyes and whatnot. My sister, upon doing some more research, even saw a YouTube video where some guy apparently got footage of these things, but I don't know about that. Supposedly happened in California. If lizardmen are real, what is happening? Is it just because of the increase in population around Dallas, or is there more something sinister happening? By the way, my father has never shown interest in cryptozoology or the paranormal, but I know he's now terrified. He believes something is stalking his house specifically. I think my sister is starting to open up. He told me he wanted to move away, ASAP. He hasn't slept right since that night, which was a while ago now, and he won't be sleeping any better now that he knows more about these things. As for me, I'm still not 100% sure what I believe, but I try to be open-minded and understand there is something going on. Something more than what I can comprehend or understand.